right place, given the right tools, given the right education, and he's thriving now, really.
I think mums and dads and you do have that kind of sixth sense.
As well, deep down, you know there's something going on, but you're not always sure what.
Hello and welcome to This is Autism, the podcast from the North East Autism Society. My name is Kerrie Highcock and I'm the Family Development Manager at the charity. Today we're going to be talking about the importance of early support for autistic children with Dr. Helen Leonard and Lyndsey Morgan. Helen is a consultant in paediatric neurodisability at the Great North Children's Hospital, and Lyndsey is mum to two autistic children, Rosie 12 and Ralph aged 8. Research shows that getting the right support early on can make a big difference to a child's experiences at school and their mental health further down the line. However, hundreds and thousands of children are currently on the waiting list for an autism diagnosis, with their families often having to cope by themselves while they wait. So today we're going to be exploring how the process works, what parents can do, and why early support is so important. So thank you so much for joining us, Helen and Lyndsey. So Helen, I'm going to start with you first. Can you tell us, what does the diagnostic process look like for preschoolers?
Hi, Kerrie. It varies slightly depending which area you're in, but the essentials are all the same. It's a mixture of gathering information from people who know the child well, so mainly parents, family, guardians, whoever the child's with, and if we can, nursery or school staff who see a lot of them as well. And then also some direct observations of the child to make sure that what people are telling us about them is in keeping with what we actually see as well. And I would say nearly all of the time, parents and nursery workers are spot on. Occasionally there are differences, and then we have to dig in a bit deeper and find out what's going on. But most of the time, those things match up. And if we have enough information from our observations of the child, from the information we've gathered from family and or nursery, and it all matches up, we look at that information against the diagnostic criteria for autism. Some people use DSM criteria, some people use ICD-11. They're very similar now. But does all the information about the differences that child's showing or the difficulties they're having match up with criteria? And do we have the evidence that they fulfill those criteria? And that's how we make a diagnosis. Often, for me, the observations are just informal. So the very young children that come in, it's often very apparent just watching them play in clinic that maybe there's a lot of body mannerisms such as flapping and tiptoe walking. They're not making much eye contact. They're not approaching the adults in the room. And if I feel I've got enough information just from those informal observations, that is enough in terms of observations. Where it's a more able child or it's less clear cut, or there's a difference between what adults are reporting about the child and what we think we're observing, then sometimes we do something more formal, which is scored. It's still fun and enjoyable for the child. And that's a play-based assessment called an ADOS. You can do ADOS at different ages, right from babies and toddlers up to adults, and there's different modules for different people. And sometimes we do an ADOS aimed at younger children. And then once we've gathered all that information, we pull it together and feed back to the family. If a child's very young, changing a lot, making a lot of progress, sometimes we don't make a diagnosis straight off, and we give them a chance to see how things are sort of panning out, and we might find that in a few months down the line, things have become more apparent one way or the other. Either the difficulties have become less and changes have been made and they're coping much better, or as they've got older, the difficulties and differences have become more apparent. But I would say a lot of the time, the outcome of that initial assessment is we do make a diagnosis either of autism or another developmental, there can be other developmental difficulties that children have, or that, actually the child is now doing okay since the time of referral, and we don't feel it is at that point they meet diagnostic criteria.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for that, Helen. So Lyndsey, what was your experience of diagnosis from a parent perspective?
Well, it was very different for both my children. I've got Ralph, who's the younger one, and he is specialist schooled now, and he was always very, very clear cut. From a young age, it was literally obvious that there's something going on here. He ticked every single box. He did everything you can imagine on the list of signs. The worst experience we had was with Rosie, who's the oldest one. We had lots and lots of problems with her. Although people were saying to us, so nurseries, teaching staff, once she got to school nursery, there's something not right. She's doing all these things. We went through CAMS initially, and we were told that she didn't have autism. So then we were left kind of feeling, well, why? Because we could see all these things, but it wasn't as obvious as with Ralph. So with her, we got kind of left to cope. Then we thought, we can't leave this. We need to go through the process again, really, because she was just getting worse at home, and we knew there was something there. So we went back and we tried again. Second time through, her paediatrician called us in, and CAMS had actually said again, no. Second time as well, no. He said that he disagreed with that, and it was a bit controversial at the time. He wasn't really supposed to do that, but he did, and he went over and above and diagnosed PDA, which I think was pervasive developmental delay at the time. Because I was just crying my eyes out in his office saying, it's so obvious there's something going on. Everybody's saying that there's these signs and symptoms. So he kind of diagnosed her with that. We were able to get a little bit more help in school, and people listened to us a little bit more because there was something to back up what we were saying. And it actually took till she was 11 for her to get a full diagnosis, and that was because the gap had become so much more apparent. She was in the last year of primary school. She was educationally very behind by this point, probably because of lack of the correct intervention all the way through. So she went to Darlington Neuro, and it was NHS again. And that time she kind of hit in every single area and got a diagnosis. So Ralph was diagnosed about 3 and he went in front of CAMS, and it was like, I'm not doing anything that you want me to do. I'm not going to play with anything. I'm not going to respond to you. He was kicking, screaming, turning away, all of those classic things. So he was diagnosed very, very early, put in the right place, given the right tools, given the right education, and he's thriving now, really. So 2 different experiences.
Yeah, and I think there's probably something to unpick there at a later date around gender differences as well, in the presentation around the assessment process. No, thank you for that, Lyndsey. That's really helpful. So, Helen, I guess from your point of view, what are some of the main differences that you see in autistic preschoolers when they're coming through for an assessment?
I would say that the majority present with speech and language delay. I would say well over 90%, the initial thing that people pick up, either the family pick up or the health visitor does pre-2, is that their language isn't developing. And then when you dig in a bit more, you find it's not just language, it's other sort of non-verbal communication as well. So not only are they not speaking, they're not using other things like pointing or eye contact. And then often the other route I would say is with behavioural differences. So not able to communicate, not able to understand what's going on around them. So getting very frustrated. And if you're frustrated as a toddler, that presents usually with behaviour. I would say now families are so much more well informed because autism is more prevalent. People are more knowledgeable and usually have some experience of friends, family, neighbours with children with autism. Often the families now are coming and saying, I think my child might have autism because of X, Y, and Z, know what they're looking for. And that's, I'm quite old now. I've been doing this for well over 20 years. And that happens much more now, whereas 20 years ago, people didn't know. And often we were having to broach the subject very gently and lead people towards that and, be pointing out the differences that were there. Whereas now people kind of know what they're looking for, or somebody, a neighbour or friend or somebody in the street sometimes has sort of said, oh, I've noticed your toddler's doing this. Do you think? So, yeah, I would say they're the main routes that children present.
Yeah, thanks, Helen. So I guess, Lyndsey, back to you. We know obviously every child is going to present differently, but in terms of, are there any kind of general strategies you can think of that would help parents at those early stages?
Obviously, it's hard. With Rosie, she was my first child. I didn't have a massive amount of knowledge with autism. I'd taught a little bit of dancing in schools. So the only knowledge I had really was when people, like teaching staff, had pointed out certain children in the class that had autism. And most of them were boys, I'll be honest, that were diagnosed. And they were sort of running wild and doing all these things. So that was really what I thought autism was. So I was a bit unsure with Rosie. And when other people did start to point out things, I thought, oh, right, okay. I also didn't really take her out into many social situations when she was young because I wasn't very well after I had her. I had some pelvic difficulties after the birth. So we couldn't get out to groups and things. And I was really struggling. So I didn't really take her places to be able to compare to other children. But I did know that she was very independent. She did not want me. She didn't want to play with me. She didn't turn. If I went in a room and said her name, she wouldn't turn for me. It was almost as if she was sat in her own little bubble, in her own little world. With Ralph, he did things like the whole tiptoe walking. He used to rub his head against his high chair repeatedly for ages. He had funny eye movements. Again, he wouldn't turn to his name. They were both in speech and language. Ralph isn't toilet trained now, but Rosie was very, very late to toilet train as well. Just a collection of small things, really, that you start to add up in your head and piece together. And then you start to think, could it be this? Could it be that? And you almost push it to the back of your mind and think, no, they'll be fine. They'll grow out of it. They're only little. But yeah, you kind of, mother's intuition, I think, as well, deep down, you know there's something going on, but you're not always sure what.
Yeah. Well, I mean, what are the, because obviously you've had a different experience with both your children. Lyndsey, one was diagnosed quite early on, Rosie much later. What for you were the benefits of getting that early diagnosis for Ralph? Was there a difference in benefits? Yeah.
Yeah, so many. Ralph's a different child. Rosie struggles. I mean, obviously she's older and she's got more understanding, but she struggles massively with mental health and anxiety now. She's always known that she didn't fit in. She's always struggled to fit into the environment that she's been in. She's struggled academically, so she's been behind her peers. The peers don't understand her. A little bit like a square peg in a round hole, whereas Ralph got his diagnosis. It was Portage workers that helped me initially. So he was put into the right nursery and they worked with me to give him what he needed. And then once he got to school, he had all the people that could understand his ways and help him learn in a way that he could learn. Whereas Rosie's had to fight against the norm all the way through and almost sat at the back of the class and not said anything, and ended up at secondary now in a progress group, sort of bottom of the rung, if you like, with her academic side, when really she is quite intelligent. She just has never had the right tools or the right support. Because we've been constantly fighting to get her all of those things. So the early diagnosis was key. Yeah.
Absolutely. She needed that to kind of give a lens in which to support her through, didn't she? That kind of diagnosis of autism. So Helen, with that, I mean, what do you see as the main benefits around early diagnosis for these children?
I think especially the last few years, there's been more and more evidence coming through about early intervention and how much it can change outcomes. The strongest evidence base is for an intervention called PACT. And we know that if you support families and the people around the child to understand their efforts at communication, whatever they are, better, and coach them to help the child, it makes a big difference in outcome. And there's a strong evidence base for that now. It was published in the Lancet, which is one of the sort of highest ranking medical journals. So it's a very high bar to get research in there. So it has to be very thorough and vigorously done. So, and I think one of the interesting things for me now, and particularly listening to Lyndsey, is we know that there's a much higher chance of younger brothers and sisters having autism. So what people have now started to do is looked at sort of preemptive intervention. So looking at children pre-18 months, pre-2, where either there are emerging signs of autism that people have picked up on early, or they're a younger brother and sister, or both. I mean, it's often people where things are being spotted really early on. It's because families have had previous experience in the immediate or extended family. And if you do PACT very early on, the differences are even bigger. So we know that about 1 in 5 brothers and sisters of children with autism will have some sort of developmental differences or difficulties. And the PACT, the studies looking at using interventions like PACT very, very early on in pre-18 months show that rather than about 1 in 5 brothers and sisters being diagnosed, then you can get the numbers down much less if you intervene very early. And even for those children who are diagnosed, having had the intervention, the differences and the difficulties they're having are less than the children that didn't have it. And I think what we'll see, I hope we see in the future, is a move to really looking in very young children. So doing health visitor checks early, more focused checks, and where you can sometimes, if you know what you're looking for, spot differences before a year old. And with those children, work really, really hard, really early on.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So I think we're going to take a little break now. And then when we come back, we will talk about some of the challenges and the barriers around diagnosis. This Christmas, the North East Autism Society is running an appeal to provide free parent and toddler groups for families across the region. It's called the Little Stars Appeal and it aims to raise £5,000 to support the play sessions, which have been described as a lifeline by parents of autistic children. There are many different ways you can help, from a donation of your choice to getting involved to one of our fundraising events like Jolly Jumper Day, or you can give a star to a loved one on our website as an alternative to sending a Christmas card. To find out more and to support this vital work, go to our website and click on our Little Stars Appeal. Thank you very much. Hi everybody, welcome back to This is Autism. Today we're discussing early support for autistic children with Dr. Helen Leonard and Mum Lyndsey Morgan. So welcome back both. Lyndsey, I just wanted to really touch on, because I know you had a very different experience for your 2 children in terms of getting a diagnosis. What do you feel were some of the barriers to that official diagnosis?
With Rosie, there wasn't any with Ralph, to be honest. With Rosie, she was the term masking, I suppose. She was a masker. She almost learned what was expected of her in the assessments. By the time we were the 3rd time through, it was a bit of a game, really. And when she was assessed, everybody said she almost seemed as though she had scripted responses. So they'd ask her a question and it was kind of like she'd take a scripted response out of her head and give them that answer. Barriers, I think the assessment is quite difficult in that so many different people have to be on the same page and see the same things. And if your child isn't doing the same things or saying the same things in front of one of the people involved, one of the sort of MAT team, then they can't sort of match up with what everybody else has seen. So everybody's got to see exactly the same thing. But with Rosie's behaviour in particular, she's very much a people pleaser, very aware of being perfectionist. She always wants to be correct. So we felt like she was performing almost. And then after each assessment, it would take a long time for her to come back to normal. She'd go to a room for a good few hours, not want to see anyone, line all the toys up, do her coping strategies, if you like. And she'd be quite down and quite quiet for a couple of days after each assessment, probably just processing everything that she'd been asked. And she's like that all the time with different situations. She very much will go and put on an act and then come home and decompress. I always say she needs her space to get back to normal after she's had to be in any social situation, I suppose. Ralph, very, very easy. Again, obvious.
Yeah, Lyndsey, because this is something that is increasingly common in the families that I support. So, how did that feel for you as mum? Having this authentic presentation, I guess, when you're at home, but then she's become very, very good, and some of our young people are incredibly good at masking. How did that feel for you when you were going to those appointments?
It was so frustrating. It was really, really frustrating. And it almost left you feeling, am I wrong? Am I seeing something that's not there? Is it me? Am I being dramatic? But we're living it day in, day out. And then we'd go from that to her going back to her normal ways and a repetition and her asking the same questions every single hour and needing that constant reassurance and all the signs and symptoms that we were experiencing. I mean, we're living that day in, day out. And then people are questioning what you're saying to them. It is a hard situation to be in. You do start to question yourself, and then you blame yourself, and you think, maybe we should leave this. This is how she is. It's just her. Let's just deal with it as it is. It's not nice.
How did it feel then, Lyndsey, when you got that final validation? Somebody finally listened and said, actually, yes, Rosie is autistic. How did that feel for you?
I just cried my eyes out. I cried my eyes out on the phone because right until the bitter end, even though you're getting the answers from the people that are sort of looking at her, and you do feel like, maybe this person is seeing it this time, especially as it was the third time we'd been through it. You've almost lost hope by then. So when the guy rang to tell me, I literally just burst into tears on the phone, and he was kind of like, "Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't want to upset you," but I said, it's what I wanted to hear. It's nice to be validated and for somebody to actually see what we've seen for all these years. And the best bit was getting the report and reading through and seeing that all of those people were on the same page. And it was like it was written in my words almost, because it was everything we'd seen for years and years. So it was just a relief. It was a relief that we were seeing the right things. We weren't making it up. We weren't imagining all these signs and symptoms, and somebody had turned around and gone, yes, this is what it is. You're right. After 11 years, this is what it is. So yeah,
it's an incredibly difficult place to be, isn't it? And I know there's just been some research come out around parental blame and parents feeling like, they're being put in a position by professionals that it's their fault. And being sent on general parenting courses and, all of these kind of things. So it's a very real, very, very real issue. So Helen, I guess your experience might be slightly different with the little ones, but what are the barriers for you of your families coming in for assessment? I mean, obviously the waiting lists are a big one. Is there anything else for the families around the barriers to diagnosis?
There's a few things. I mean, I think the flip side to Lyndsey's experience, and we do see that. I mean, often it is upper end of primary school by the time children get diagnosed, and clearly the issues have been there all along. They have got to be at a level where there's a clear observable difference between typical behaviour and autistic behaviour. And, some of the young children, like I say, they walk in the room and really after 10 minutes, you do the full assessment, but it sounds like, that's what Ralph was like, perhaps, that it's really very clear. And you do the full assessment, but it's very obvious. There are other children where it's not. And I think they're the ones we're very careful about listening very carefully to families. Getting information from schools as well, and it sounds your description of your older little girl sort of performing almost for professionals, we do meet a whole group of children that actually one-to-one with an adult, they do come across really, really well. If we go out and look, and that can be younger children as well, but one-to-one with an adult, they really enjoy that interaction, and you think, oh, they've got some nice social skills. But then you see them, and we'll go out and look at them in school, and you watch them with a group of children in school in a social environment where it's not that one-to-one and they don't have that structure around them, and you can see them really floundering. The difficulty for us is we just don't have the manpower to do sort of school independent observations on every child, but that's useful when we do it, so we sort of save it when there's things are proving tricky and things aren't obvious. I think schools as well now, many of the mainstream schools where I work have a whole number of children with autism, and they're getting really good at looking out for things as well. So often the school information is really useful, but sometimes you come across schools where maybe staff are less used to seeing autistic children, and they haven't, so you'll get quite a positive report. And I think schools are generally, their mode of operation really is about being positive, and which is great, and focusing on progress. And we sometimes get quite positive reports from school, but the parent will go, yeah, but actually they rang me last week because X had happened. I can't believe they've written this positive report. So it's just about being careful about all the information we're getting and unpicking it to make sure that is absolutely what's going on. Like I say, 95% of the time, probably more than that, we get information from school, family, look at the child, all matches up very easy. It's when it doesn't, you really need to get your thinking cap on and work out why. Is this a child who's very good one-to-one with adults? Is it that the school are missing stuff? Is it that people are actually over-reporting? And we do see that sometimes, that we see children with other things. They're referred because everybody knows about autism, and that's the first thing that pops up on Google or whatever, and school are used to autism, and actually it's not that. And, we see children who have been abused and subject to domestic violence who present with behaviour difficulties. And one of my worries now is we're just getting so used to autism that we could miss other things. So I think we've got to be very careful to still be thorough with our assessments, and listen hard to families and to other people that know the child. And if we're not sure, actually the best thing to do is put some help in, put some support in. It's not just all about the label. It's making sure that child's well supported, look at where they're struggling, put the help in and see if it makes a difference, and then revisit things a year or so down the line.
Yeah. No, absolutely, Helen. I can hear exactly what you're saying there. We need to have that very holistic view, don't we? Because, life as it is just becoming more and more complicated for everyone, isn't it? And there's multiple factors at play when we're looking at somebody holistically. And I see that in practice, supporting families who, yes, the child might be autistic or may not be autistic, but also there's a multitude of factors around that family. Yeah.
And I think another thing which I forgot to mention as well is autism sometimes exists as autism on its own. But for a paediatrician, I'm also well aware that there's a much higher incidence of autism alongside other maybe genetic conditions. So I've seen children in my autism clinic that have had muscular dystrophy. In fact, just in the last couple of months, I've picked up a child who, was preschool, classically autistic, but had very large calf muscles, which is one of the markers for muscle problems, and said, I think we need to check on this, and they're busy going through that. So it's not just about autism or something else, which it can be, and looking for other things instead. It's also other things as well. Autism is much more frequent in children with Down syndrome, for example. And, I know it sounds very strange, and people always sort of look at me slightly oddly when I say this, but I've seen 2 children that got to age 5 with Down syndrome before anybody realised. So it's really important that very young children particularly are seen by a paediatrician for that holistic assessment. It's not just autism, yes or no. It's you've got to think of other things instead as well, alongside, it's and exactly what's going on. It's a very bespoke process. It's not a treadmill and I worry that some services have become like that because of the sheer volume of numbers. It becomes, right, you have this and this with feedback, boom, and it becomes a bit of a treadmill. And we can't do that. We need to offer a bespoke. The core elements have got to be there, but the assessment needs to be bespoke for each child and family.
Yeah. Thank you, Helen. So before we leave, my last question to you both, and I've gone off script a little bit here, but if you were going to, give a final piece of, I don't know, a top tip or a bit of advice to families, Lyndsey, knowing what you know now, and I know you might have more than one top tip, but what would you want families to hear at the end of this podcast?
I would say that you know your child better than anybody. Not to panic, because a lot of my clients that come in think their children have autism and they start to really panic and they get very upset about it. It's not necessarily a negative thing. Like, I wouldn't change my 2 for the world. I think they're absolutely hilarious and it is a bit of a superpower. So don't panic and don't worry. But just keep going. If you're not getting anywhere, but you're adamant that there's something going on, keep going back and keep asking the question. Because like Helen said, there's so many people these days that are on those lists, making those lists long and making the process very hard and very arduous. But if you know there's something not right, then just don't give up, just keep trying, basically.
Thanks, Lyndsey. And Helen, from yourself, what would be... It's hard to summarise one, isn't it?
Yeah, it would really, I think it runs very well with what Lyndsey's just said. If you are concerned, go the earlier the better, okay? So if it turns out to be nothing, great, that's absolutely fine. But even those, and I think mums and dads and you do have that kind of sixth sense, like Lyndsey said. If you think things aren't right, go really early on.
Thank you. I know you're both incredibly busy people. We really appreciate you coming on today. So thank you so much. And to our listeners, thank you for listening. If you've got any questions or comments about anything you've heard, please get in touch at info@ne-as.org.uk. You can also follow North East Autism Society on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn and X. This podcast comes out every month and you can subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Google or Spotify so you never miss an episode. So bye for now and take care everyone till next time. Bye.